Hey guys, thanks for checking out the 67th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. Now this week I'm taking a break from reading the bills to talk about Ukraine. And actually that's not entirely true. I did read a couple of bills for this episode as our Congress is preparing to loan Ukraine $1 billion of our tax money through the International Monetary Fund. Now, there have been some squabbles going back and forth about what dingleberries are going to be attached to this particular bill, but the moral of the story is that Ukraine will get our money. This $1 billion loan is uncontroversial in that strange universe that our lawmakers seem to live in. But this episode is going to focus not just on the legislation, but on the bigger picture, specifically why the United States is involved in Ukraine at all. See, that was my question. Here we are on the verge of restarting the Cold War with Russia over a country most of us know nothing about, and I simply wanted to know why. So I followed the money. I followed that $1 billion that is uncontroversial in Congress, and the money led me right to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Now, the International Monetary Fund is the tool used to make the shock doctrine happen, and the shock doctrine pattern is impossible to miss in Ukraine. The Shock Doctrine, if for those of you who don't know, is a book by Naomi Klein that changed how I saw everything. Some people had the same reaction to Confessions of an Economic Hitman, but it's all the same idea. The International Monetary Fund, which the United States controls, lends countries money and in return forces those countries to change their laws to make the laws more corporate friendly. If you haven't listened to the third episode of Congressional Dish yet, titled The Free Market versus Us, you should do that right now, as the pattern will be crystal clear for those of you who have. But even if this is all new to you, stick with me. This might be the first time someone shows you this pattern, but I'm sure it won't be the last. Now, I don't intend to explain everything that is happening in Ukraine. Ukraine is a complicated place with a complicated history, both with the Western capitalist countries and with Russia. I can't even pretend that I understand it all. But the IMF storyline is an important one that is being ignored. The Russia-Crimea invasion story is important too, and that's being covered best, in my opinion, by Dan Carlin on his podcast Common Sense. I strongly recommend you listen to episode 270, Poking the Bear, and episode 271, Cashing the Doomsday Check, for perspective on the Crimea invasion. My focus today is going to be on our country, the United States, not Russia, and what our motivations are for getting involved in Ukraine. Before I get started, though, I'd like to remind you guys that there are very few resources for American citizens to find out the details of what's happening in our government. If we want to know poll numbers, we're set. If we want to hear lots of opinions about the next election, we're set. If we want talking point analyses, we're set. But if we want to know what's in the bills that might become our laws, if we want to know what our representatives are doing, not saying, where can we find that information? Seriously, stop and think about that for a second. What else could you listen to? That's how this show, Congressional Dish, got started. I wanted to know what was in the bills, and I didn't know where to find it. To my knowledge, another show like this doesn't exist. Now, I don't want to read legislation any more than you do. There's a reason our representatives go to fundraisers instead of reading bills. Parties are way more fun. But someone has to do this, and I volunteered. The thing is that this is work. Actual hard work. One person this week, other than the subscribers without whom this show would not be possible, one person this week acknowledged that this is work and pitched into this project. Michael contributed $50, and with it, he sent me this message. Quote, "Hang in there, you're doing a great service. Do me a favor if you mention this donation in your opener, say to Carl F., stop being a chiseler and give this poor girl some money," unquote. Michael, first of all, thank you. Second, I had to look up what chiseler meant. It means, quote, a dishonest person who uses clever means to cheat others out of something of value. Good word. I like that. Carl F., thank you for listening to Congressional Dish. Stop being a chiseler. Help a podcast out. But here's the thing. Don't do it because I'm some poor girl. I'm not at all. I know I've shared with you guys some of our personal struggles lately, but I'm fine. Seriously, financially and every other way. I'm personally fine. You should contribute because I'm working for you. Just like the congressman who you pay a minimum wage of $174,000 per year. And if that's not a good enough reason, today is my birthday. The PayPal buttons are on the right-hand side of congressionaldish.com. Okay, so why are we giving at least $1 billion to Ukraine? Let's get started.
Maybe it is dangerous to invite us in to rid the room with us. The mess is going right up and I'm not scared at all. When there's no more money in politics, they'll be tearing down the union brick by brick. They'll be sitting on the clinics about where we have been.
Okay, so the TV narrative about Ukraine goes a little something like this. The people of Ukraine have risen up, used the power of the people to throw out a bad Russian-friendly government, which has been replaced with a good Europe and US-friendly government. Then the evil President Putin of Russia invaded Ukraine and stole a piece of Ukraine's land named Crimea. Now, the TV storytellers often fail to mention that, kind of like how we use Cuban land for Guantanamo Bay Prison, Russia rents Ukrainian land in Crimea for a major Russian naval base. They also fail to mention that Crimea was a part of Russia when my parents were born. Regardless, now the United States and Europe are proclaiming that Russia's actions were out of line. Our Congress is in the process of approving sanctions against Russians, and our president wants to kick Russia out of international summits. We might be restarting the Cold War, which was that war during my parents' childhood that had them all scared of nuclear bombs. But it's important to remember that all of this is happening because of Ukraine. My question is why? Why is my country, the United States, involved in this at all? What do we want from Ukraine, which is so important that it's worth risking nuclear war? The answer, I think, is the free market. Ukraine is a potential profit bonanza, and our government is going to help free the multinational corporations, free the market to sell the assets and use the people of Ukraine. The way the multinationals and the Western governments who work for them plan to capture Ukraine is through the International Monetary Fund, better known by its initials, the IMF. Here's how this works. The IMF loans struggling countries money. In Ukraine's case, they're being promised $27 billion. But in return, the IMF demands that the country change its economic laws to make them much more corporate friendly. As explained in The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, there are 3 economic principles that the three marketeers want their target countries to adhere to. Number 1, governments must remove all rules and regulations standing in the way of the accumulation of profits. Number 2, governments should sell off any assets they own that corporations could be running at a profit. And number 3, governments should dramatically cut back funding of social programs. In Ukraine, their elected government, an elected government that had recently changed course and backed out of a quote-unquote free trade deal with Europe and was recently cut off from promised IMF cash because it didn't change Ukraine's economic laws fast enough, was overthrown. And it was replaced, conveniently, by an IMF-friendly government, which has restarted the free trade deal with Europe and has promised to enact the quote-unquote painful IMF economic reforms. Here's Ukraine's new prime minister speaking to the cameras while sitting next to our president, Barack Obama.
You know that we resumed talks with the IMF. We do understand that these are tough reforms, but these reforms are needed for the Ukrainian state. And we are back on track in terms of delivering real reforms in my country. As I already informed you, probably in the nearest future, next week or in 10 days, Ukraine is to sign a political part of association agreement with the European Union. And we want to be very clear that Ukraine is and will be a part of the Western world.
Clearly, the IMF reforms and the free trade deal with Europe are an important part of this story, and I believe that the potential profits in Ukraine are the reason why. So what are these potential profits? The 2 biggest pots of gold in Ukraine are in energy and agriculture. First, energy. Ukraine is completely hooked on natural gas for energy, and they've been buying their gas from Russia. The multinational fossil fuel companies that are currently tearing up our landscape for natural gas would love to have the natural gas-addicted Ukrainians as new customers. The following clip is Representative Ed Royce, who's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This was part of his opening statement during a hearing about the United States' response to Ukraine.
Addressing Ukraine's energy security must be part of our response. Russia has repeatedly used its supply of natural gas to pressure Ukraine economically and politically, and has announced that it will significantly increase its cost in a deliberate effort to squeeze Ukraine. Fortunately, we have an option to help counter this threat, namely reducing the current impediments to exports of American gas to the Ukraine.
The problem is that the United States doesn't have the infrastructure to ship gas overseas. Congressmen paid by fossil fuel companies will use this crisis to try to get approval for about 24 export projects currently under review, and in a few years would allow the multinationals to use these projects to ship our natural gas overseas. The thing is that the paid-off congressmen are really just using the Ukraine crisis as an opportunity to argue for something that they've been pushing for anyway, for us citizens to permit and pay for the infrastructure that lets multinationals export our fossil fuels. Yes, there is some profits to be made by selling natural gas to Ukraine, but the big money is in Ukraine itself. See, poor Ukraine has the potential to become filthy rich because of the country's untapped natural gas supplies. Ukraine has not one but two big shale formations that are mostly unfracked. Russia has been giving Ukrainians discounts on their natural gas that have kept Ukrainians' prices just low enough that Ukraine's state gas company hasn't bothered yet to really start fracking at home. And yes, that's the other thing. Ukraine's natural gas industry is nationalized. Ukraine's natural gas belongs to the state. It belongs to the government. It belongs to the people. And their people, understandably, want to use their own natural gas to power their country. In fact, in 2011, Ukrainians passed a law that said that all natural gas fracked in Ukraine must be sold to Ukrainians. No exports allowed. What that means for the people of Ukraine is that they could become energy independent, if you will, if they fracked their shale formations. What that means for multinational fossil fuel corporations is that they can't profit from exporting Ukraine's nationalized natural gas. A United States government that functions by and for the people would understand and support Ukrainians who want to keep the gas stored under their feet, gas that Ukrainians will have to sacrifice their water, their land, their air, and their health to access. A United States government that functions by and for the market, the multinational corporations, would want Ukraine to turn that gas over to the market, to the private sector. And lucky for them, according to Morgan Williams, president and CEO of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, quote, "The new prime minister says he wants to privatize the state-owned energy companies," unquote. Very lucky indeed. The other source of potential monster profits in Ukraine is in agriculture. Ukraine has been nicknamed the breadbasket of Europe for centuries, and just this past January, the Financial Times called Ukraine, quote, "one of the world's most promising agriculture commodity producers," unquote. The reason is that in 2013, while California, America's breadbasket, withered away in an epic drought, Ukraine had their best year ever for corn. The market is practically drooling over the prospects of getting control of this land. Morgan Williams, president and CEO of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, which is the group I think is really calling the shots here, said, quote, "The potential here for agriculture, agribusiness is amazing. Production here could double. The world needs the food Ukraine could produce in the future. Ukraine's agriculture could be a real gold mine," unquote. So it turns out that Ukraine is a country with huge untapped natural gas reserves, which can be easily transported and sold to Europe since Ukraine already houses two of the most important gas pipelines, which transport natural gas from Russia to Europe. Ukraine is also a country with fertile land in a time when other breadbaskets of the world are either flooded or withering in drought. Add to that Ukraine's educated workforce ripe for corporate slavery, and you've got a country that the market would love to take advantage of. This is why Ukraine is a target. This is why we're involved. So what exactly is it that we want? Well, the geopolitical aspect of this is pretty easy to understand. We want Ukraine to be a part of Europe because Russia bad, Europe good. But what about the economics? What are the new economic laws that we want the IMF to force upon Ukraine? Well, the IMF wants Ukraine to first and foremost cut heating assistance for Ukrainian citizens. Here's an exchange from a hearing conducted by the House Foreign Affairs Committee about Ukraine, specifically the $1 billion we will contribute to the IMF loan. Representative Karen Bass of California is questioning Dalip Singh, who was at the hearing representing the United States Treasury Department.
Mr. Singh, on page 3 of your testimony, you talk about the IMF, and what is needed is an economic adjustment program that eliminates unsustainable economic imbalances and poorly targeted government subsidies. I was wondering if you could be more specific as to what those subsidies are, what needs to be changed, and then also, is the IMF support contingent on that?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So that's precisely how the IMF works, is that its assistance is contingent upon economic reforms being met, and these reforms are good for Ukraine. And the three core reforms that I referenced, number one, there has been an unsustainable buildup in fiscal spending over the years in Ukraine. That needs to be addressed. Number two, there are truly massive energy subsidies that have been a part, that have played...
Subsidies to companies or subsidies to the population?
To the population, to tariffs that are paid for heating and gas and so forth.
So like I said earlier, the Ukrainians have been getting their natural gas from Russia, which has given Ukraine enough of a discount to disincentivize the Ukrainian state gas company from investing in fracking for natural gas inside of Ukraine. This discount is passed along to the Ukrainian people by their government. As long as the Ukrainian people are not complaining about high natural gas prices, they will not be motivated to open up their land to fracking, and all the freshwater use, freshwater poisoning, uncontrollable fires, earthquakes, and cancer air that comes with it. The first step to getting the free market into those shale formations is taking away the Ukrainians' gas subsidies and making the population feel the financial pain. Now, real quick, I just want to replay a piece of that opening statement from Representative Ed Royce, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Russia has repeatedly used its supply of natural gas to pressure Ukraine economically and politically, and has announced that it will significantly increase its cost in a deliberate effort to squeeze Ukraine.
I would like to point out that forcing Ukraine's government to stop contributing to citizens' heating bills does the exact same thing. Russia will raise Ukrainians' gas prices at the same time we force Ukraine to also raise gas prices for citizens. Double whammy. Sorry, Ukraine. With such high gas prices, maybe you should consider fracking your own land. I'm sure Halliburton would help. Anyway, moving on, here's Dalip Singh again from the Treasury Department.
And then the third piece, apart from moving on the energy subsidy problem, which I mentioned has led to overconsumption and reliance on Russian gas, I should say, is on their exchange rate. It's overvalued. It's caused them to have a real problem in terms of exports. It's made their economy uncompetitive.
So the market, the IMF, the multinationals want to devalue Ukraine's currency. The reason is because when companies are able to buy their supplies and pay the workers in Ukraine in an almost worthless currency, but can sell Ukraine's natural gas and food to the rest of the world in dollars, that equals huge profits. Pay the Ukrainians in pennies, and corporations
Get the money, dollar bill, yo.
Now, of course, this sucks for the Ukrainians because they'll have to buy everything they import in dollars, but will still be paid in the becoming worthless quickly local currency. But this isn't about helping the population now, is it? Back to Dalip Singh from the Treasury Department.
One last thing is, I should say, it's very good news in terms of the political will that we're observing on the ground, that we're already seeing some movement on these reforms. The currency in Ukraine has weakened quite a bit and become much more flexible. It's becoming much more driven by market forces. That's a condition of the IMF, and the leadership of Ukraine has shown a willingness already to move in that direction.
Sure enough, since the IMF government was installed, Ukraine's currency has fallen 24%, according to Business Week, making it the worst performing currency this year. Now, by looking through IMF documents, you can find out that they have other plans for Ukraine as well. Another goal of the IMF is to facilitate mergers and acquisitions of banks. What does this mean? It means create too big to fail, Ukrainian style. The big banks, many of them likely foreign, will gobble up the little Ukrainian banks, which control 58% of the Ukrainian banking industry in 2010, according to the IMF's own documents. Other IMF goals for Ukraine include, quote, repeal of burdensome government regulations, unquote. Sound familiar? IMF goals also include, quote, wage and employment restraint, unquote, which translate to lower wages and the cutting of Ukrainian government jobs via, quote, reforms and reductions, unquote, in the health and education sectors, which make up the bulk of public employment in Ukraine. This is on purpose. The money we are giving to Ukraine through the IMF comes with these strings attached, and everybody's on board. Here's Democratic Senator Robert Menendez, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
And it is also very clear that the IMF is not going to give Ukraine a single dime if, in fact, it does not meet a series of standards and obligations in order to do so.
Here's Senator Rand Paul, darling of the libertarians.
We have more chance of actually getting reforms if the money's dependent on the reforms rather than you get them the money and then say, hopefully this new government will institute reforms.
Here's Democratic Representative in the House, Eliot Engel.
We must also support Ukraine's efforts to reach an agreement with the IMF and implement reforms to address structural weaknesses.
Here's Dalip Singh again, representing our Treasury Department.
I should just add that the IMF and the international community have more than enough resources to meet Ukraine's needs, so long as it's willing to make the commitments to reform.
Here's Barack Obama, President of the United States.
The economic situation in Ukraine has become more challenging, not less. And that's why I'm very proud that not only as critical members of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, we are working with the Prime Minister and his team in a package that can help to institute necessary reforms inside of the Ukraine.
Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, President, they're all in on this. They all work for the market. The people be damned. And all of these new laws are in addition to the laws the IMF had already got changed by the recently ousted government in Ukraine. Ukraine already reformed their pension system by raising their retirement age for women only, from 55 to 60. Ukraine lowered their corporate tax rates in 2010. Ukraine laid off 30,000 public employees in 2011. And Ukraine also privatized their 11th largest bank, selling it to a titanium business tycoon who gobbled up Ukraine's government-owned titanium in a fire sale of Ukrainian state assets in 2004. But it wasn't enough. The old prime minister refused to cut the gas heating subsidies for the citizens, so the IMF cut off their loan to the government, and that guy was conveniently thrown out on his ass. The new guy is working out much better. Here's Eric Rubin speaking on behalf of the White House National Security Council.
And we've said all along that the way to do that was to engage in a serious dialogue with the International Monetary Fund, bring in the people who know how to do these assessments, and then have a serious negotiation. The previous government did not do that, and as a result, did not get the help and the advice that it needed. We're very encouraged by this current interim government's readiness to engage with the fund, to welcome the advice, and to begin making the difficult reforms.
So this is what we're pushing for in Ukraine. We want them to raise their retirement age, reform their pension system, repeal burdensome regulations, cut subsidies, food stamps, heating, cut them all. Sound familiar? The same fuckers in our government that are doing this to us, the free marketeers that are selling off our assets, driving down our paychecks, driving up prices and increasing profits at all of our expense. They're doing it to other countries. They have been since before I was born. Economic laws that allow multinationals to profit in other countries. This is what we're fighting for? Freedom for multinationals? Is this what we stand for? Based on the people we've been voting for? Yeah, I guess we do. So, where are we now? Well, it appears that the Ukrainians are screwed. The new prime minister has said that he's prepared to be, quote, the most unpopular prime minister in the whole history, unquote. And he's enacting the new economic laws full steam ahead. For our part in our Congress, the IMF loan money is uncontroversial. Both the House and the Senate have approved $1 billion of our tax money, which would go towards the IMF loan, the loan that allows the IMF to grab Ukraine by the balls and force them to change their laws. Congress has been fighting over this particular bill, but fighting over the dingleberries that will be attached to it. The ransom money is ready to go. In return, Ukraine's new government is changing Ukraine's economic laws. The multinational corporations will sell Ukraine's natural gas and their food. The market will grow, and profits will be plentiful. The Ukrainian people, however, can expect their land to be fracked, their assets sold to the best-connected bidders, their currency will be devalued, their wages will go down, their local banks will be acquired by the multinational banks, their food will be shipped out of the country, their heating bills will rise, and their standard of living will go down. How do I know? Because that's what's happened to us. That's what happened in Iraq during the Bush years. That's what happened in South Korea in the 90s. That's what happened in Poland and Bolivia in the 80s. That's what happened to Argentina and Indonesia and Chile in the 70s. It's what happens everywhere the free market goes. The IMF is just the tool being used. The problem is the policy. The problem is that we haven't yet caught on to the scam. The free market scam. People believe in the virtues of the free market like a religion. If we only give the market more freedom, everyone will prosper. That theory is unquestioned. Its lack of proven effectiveness faithfully brushed aside. The good news is that we in the United States are the ones doing this. It's our representatives. It's our votes that let them go or stay. We have the power to stop this, to say enough. With new people in power, we can let other countries be free to make their own laws. With new people in power, we can stop rigging the world for corporate gain. With new people in power, we can stop doing the bidding of fossil fuel companies. We have the power to stop corporate price gouging of citizens at home and around the world. The first step is acknowledging that we have a problem. Only then can we fix it.
Shining the light on the darkest places. You know and I know we have to face this now. We have to face this now. Shining the light on the darkest places. Putting the word out. We have to face this now. We have to face this now.
All right, so that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Congressional Dish. To keep this show going, please visit congressionaldish.com and contribute whatever you can. There are 2 PayPal buttons on the right side of the page. One of them allows you to contribute any one-time number that works for you. And then there's also the subscription option, which is my favorite. I love my subscribers. I need my subscribers. And that lets you contribute between $5 and $100 a month, whatever works for you. And you are essential to the future of this podcast. If you're not able to contribute right now for financial reasons, you can also use the Amazon link on congressionaldish.com when you make purchases, and the show does get a commission. You can also leave a 5-star rating and a glowing review on iTunes, which helps the show move up in the ratings. And most importantly, you can tell your friends about Congressional Dish. To those of you who have done or will do any of these things, thank you. I need you guys. Music this week was provided by MXPX. The song is called The Darkest Places, and then the intro and outro music, as usual, is Tired of Being Lied To by David Ippolito. All right, barring some emergency, the next episode will be about a bill that passed in February that sells United States land to the market. I guess what goes around comes around. Talk to you soon, guys. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.